She moved deep into the wilderness to forget the past. But the past wasn't the only thing that had followed her. One frost-covered morning, Elena Shaw, a former soldier carrying wounds no one could see, spotted a shadow moving through the snow. Not a predator, not discarded trash. A bag, heavy, dirty, torn. And when she saw what was inside, her heart nearly stopped. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. The wind howled softly through the Bitterroot Mountains, carrying the scent of dry grass and pine resin. Lena Harper, 40 years old, stood on the creaking porch of a weathered cabin, her breath visible in the crisp autumn air. A former soldier, her frame was lean and hardened from years of military discipline, but her eyes, deep brown and shadowed, betrayed a wound no training could mend. 1 year ago, her world had shattered when her 6-year-old son Ethan died in a car accident on a quiet Missoula street. The loss had unraveled her marriage to a soft-spoken engineer, their nights dissolving into arguments or suffocating silence. Divorce followed, a formality after months of grief-driven distance. Missoula, once a home filled with Ethan's laughter, became a maze of unbearable memories. The sidewalk where he rode his bike, the park where she pushed him on the swings, his small hand in hers. Unable to bear it, Lena fled, not to forget but to face her pain alone in a place where the world's noise couldn't reach her. She sought silence, a chance to breathe without the weight of loss crushing her chest. Lena had borrowed the cabin from Sarah, a high school friend whose family owned the land. Tucked deep in the Bitterroot, 50 miles from Missoula, it was a sanctuary of isolation. The mountains stretched around her, a rugged expanse of sparse forests and open meadows, where the only sounds were the rustle of cottonwood leaves and the distant cry of a hawk. At night, gray wolves sometimes howled, their eerie calls echoing across the valleys. Lena chose this place for its solitude, but also for a faint memory of freedom. As a teenager, she and Sarah had camped in these mountains, laughing under starlit skies, unburdened by the weight of adulthood. Now, standing on the porch, she wondered if that girl still existed somewhere inside her, or if Ethan's death had buried her too. The cabin itself was small and worn, its log walls grayed by decades of wind and rain. The roof, patched with mismatched shingles, sagged slightly, and a single window faced the meadow, framing a view of golden grass and low pines. Inside, the furnishings were sparse: a scarred wooden table, a threadbare armchair, and a rusty wood stove that hissed when lit. There was no electricity, only a small generator for emergencies and a few oil lamps for light. Lena had arrived with little. A green military backpack frayed from her service days held clothes, canned food, and a tactical flashlight. Her old combat knife, its handle worn smooth, lay on the table, a relic of missions she'd rather forget. But the most precious item was a silver-framed photo of Ethan, taken on a summer day in a Missoula field. His grin, wide and unguarded, shone against the backdrop of wild flowers. Lena placed the frame on the table next to the knife and a blank notebook, her fingers lingering on the glass. Each glance at his face was a knife to her heart, yet she couldn't look away. It was her way of keeping him close, even as the pain threatened to swallow her whole. Lena wasn't here to heal in the conventional sense. Therapists, support groups, the pitying looks of friends, she'd rejected them all. She'd survived boot camp deployments and the chaos of war by facing challenges head-on, alone. This was no different. She had no clear plan, no timeline for recovery. She only hoped the quiet of the Bitterroot would teach her to live again, to breathe without feeling like she was drowning. Ethan's death had locked her emotions in a vice. She hadn't cried since his funeral, her grief expressed only in the clench of her fists or the tightness in her jaw. The cabin was a test. If she could endure its solitude, she might reclaim some fragment of herself. The woman who once laughed with Ethan, who believed life could be kind. On her first day, Lena stood outside, boots sinking into the soft earth of the porch. The meadow stretched before her, a sea of grass swaying under a gray sky. She inhaled deeply, the air sharp with the scent of frost and pine. It was peaceful, yet empty, mirroring the hollow ache in her chest. That night, as she lay in the narrow bed, a wolf's howl pierced the darkness, low, mournful, and distant. She sat up, heart racing not from fear but from a strange curiosity. It was as if the wilderness was speaking, whispering something she couldn't yet understand. She walked to the window, the meadow bathed in moonlight, and stared into the shadows. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from a premonition. This place, this silence, would change her. She didn't know how, but the wolf's cry lingered in her mind, a promise of something waiting beyond the horizon. The cabin was shrouded in the chill of a late autumn morning, the air seeping through the cracks in the door, sharp and biting. A thin veil of fog clung to the meadow outside, softening the edges of the Bitterroot landscape. Lena Harper woke before dawn, her body stiff from the narrow bed. She sat at the scarred wooden table, her fingers brushing the silver frame of Ethan's photo, his 6-year-old smile frozen in time. Her eyes, hollow with grief, stared past the glass. The silence of the cabin was absolute, broken only by the faint crackle of kindling as she lit the wood stove to brew coffee. The bitter aroma filled the air, a small comfort in the vast emptiness of her new life. Outside, the first light of day crept over the meadow, catching the dew on the grass and turning it into a field of glittering diamonds. Lena sipped her coffee, the mug warm against her palms, and let the quiet settle around her like a heavy cloak. Then a sound pierced the stillness, a slow, deliberate scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the gravel beyond the meadow. It wasn't footsteps, not the rustle of wind or the snap of a branch, but a labored, purposeful noise that sent a shiver down Lena's spine. She froze, the mug trembling in her hands, her soldier's instincts snapping awake. The scraping paused, then resumed, closer now, inching toward the cabin, with a weight that felt intentional. Her breath quickened, the memory of the wolf's howl from her first night flickering in her mind. She stood, moving silently, her boots soft on the wooden floor, and pressed herself against the wall by the window. The sound was unlike anything natural. No deer, no fallen limb. It carried a strange urgency, as if something was struggling to reach her. Lena eased the tattered curtain aside, peering into the fog. The meadow was a blur of gray, the cottonwoods swaying faintly, but nothing moved. Her mind raced, conjuring possibilities: a wounded deer caught in a fence, its hooves scraping the earth, or worse, a poacher dragging an illegal kill through the dawn. Her gaze flicked to the combat knife on the table, its blade glinting in the dim light. Years of training urged her to grab it, to prepare for a threat, but something held her back, a gut feeling honed by battles and loss that this was no ordinary danger. She tightened her grip on the window frame, her knuckles white, her heart pounding with a mix of curiosity and dread. The scraping grew louder, now just a few dozen feet from the cabin, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavier than before, pressing against her chest. Lena stood frozen, waiting, knowing that whatever was out there would reveal itself, soon. Through the narrow slit of the window, Lena caught a glimpse of movement in the fog. Her breath caught as a figure emerged. A gray wolf, its silver fur damp with dew, eyes gleaming like polished gold in the faint light. The she-wolf gripped a tattered canvas bag in her jaws, the kind hikers used, caked with dirt and grass, its seams fraying. She dragged it across the gravel, each step a struggle, her muzzle trembling with the effort. Her ears stood erect, alert, but there was no snarl, no bared teeth, only a fierce focus, as if driven by a mission. The bag was heavy, unnatural in her grasp, not prey but something else entirely. Lena's pulse raced, her mind grappling with the strangeness. Why would a wolf carry a human's bag? The scene felt wrong, ancient, like a riddle from the wilderness itself. The she-wolf was lean, her body taut with endurance, though exhaustion weighed her down. Her silver coat was streaked with mud, her tail low, brushing the ground. Her eyes, sharp as blades, scanned the meadow, never settling on the cabin, as if searching for danger or fleeing from it. Each pull of the bag was a battle. Her front paws sank into the gravel, leaving deep furrows, her shoulders straining under the load. Lena noticed a faint scar on the wolf's flank, jagged and old, perhaps from a hunter's trap or a fight for survival. It spoke of a journey far harder than this moment. A low, keening sound escaped the wolf's throat, not a growl but a murmur of desperation, chilling Lena to her core. The wolf moved with purpose, her strength fading but her will unbroken, a mother's resolve etched in every labored step. Lena stood rooted, her hands still clutching the window frame, her heart hammering. Fear mingled with fascination, the wolf's presence both terrifying and magnetic. She remembered the howl from her first night, wondering if this was the same creature, drawn to her cabin for reasons she couldn't fathom. Her soldier's instinct screamed to arm herself, to meet the unknown with steel. But she didn't move toward the knife. Something deeper, a whisper of intuition, told her the wolf wasn't a threat, but a mystery. The image of the she-wolf dragging the bag stirred memories of Ethan, of her own desperate fight to save him, the hospital lights, the machines that couldn't bring him back. She shook her head, pushing the pain down, but it clung to her, raw and unyielding. The wolf's struggle felt like a mirror, reflecting her own. Lena stayed there, eyes locked on the creature, sensing that this moment, inexplicable and primal, would alter the course of her life. The she-wolf stopped, 40 feet from the cabin, her jaws releasing the bag. It thudded onto the gravel, motionless for a heartbeat. Her ears twitched, erect and vigilant, as her golden eyes swept the meadow, then fixed on the window where Lena stood. The gaze pierced through her, not with aggression but with an unspoken weight, as if the wolf saw her, knew her. She took 2 steps back, her body low, her silver fur blending into the fog. There was no growl, no bared fangs, only a stillness, an invitation. Lena's breath hitched, her skin prickling. The wolf's eyes held no challenge, only expectation, as if passing a burden she could no longer carry. A soft howl, brief and resonant, spilled from her throat, vibrating through the meadow, making Lena's hands tremble. It was a call, not of threat but of purpose, stirring the air like a prayer. Then the bag twitched, a faint shuddering movement, not from the wind or gravity, but from something alive inside. Lena's eyes widened, her pulse surging. The canvas, torn at the edges, its zipper mangled by teeth, revealed a glimpse of soiled fabric, but the contents remained hidden. The motion came again, weak, desperate, a living thing fighting to survive. The she-wolf's gaze shifted to the bag, her ears drooping slightly, then back to Lena, her eyes unwavering, urging her forward. The message was clear, though impossible. The wolf wanted her to act, to uncover what she had brought. Lena's chest tightened, the weight of the moment pressing down, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Lena's hand found the door handle, her fingers shaking as she turned it. The cold bit into her bare feet as she stepped onto the porch, her breath clouding in the frigid air. She stood 40 feet from the bag, the she-wolf watching from a distance, her body statue still but ready to bolt. The meadow was silent, the fog curling around them, time itself slowing to a crawl. Lena's heart pounded, fear warring with a pull she couldn't name. The wolf didn't move, didn't growl, her ears upright, her gaze steady. Lena clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, memories of Ethan flooding back, his small body in the hospital, her powerlessness to save him. She couldn't turn away now, not from this. The bag twitched again, a faint rustle breaking the silence. Lena took a step forward, her soldier's resolve merging with a mother's compassion, driven to face whatever lay within, though she had no idea what it would demand of her. Kneeling beside the bag, 40 feet from the she-wolf, Lena's hands trembled as she touched the broken zipper. The canvas was rough, stained with dirt and blood, its edges charred as if it had survived a fire. She eased it open, her breath shallow, and peered inside. Curled within was a wolf cub, no larger than a puppy, its gray fur matted with mud, its eyes, golden but clouded with dust, blinked weakly, its tiny body shivering with exhaustion. The cub tried to lift its head, ears drooping, but managed only a faint whimper, a sound so fragile it seemed to hang by a thread. Lena's throat tightened, the sight of the cub's frailty cutting deeper than she expected. The bag's scars, burns, blood, tears, told of a journey through hell, yet somehow this small life had endured, a miracle against all odds. The she-wolf stood motionless, her golden eyes fixed on Lena, unyielding but not threatening. She let out a low, keening whimper, not a growl but a plea, soft and resonant, carrying the weight of her desperation. Another faint howl followed, barely audible, yet it echoed through the meadow, pressing against Lena's chest. The wolf's ears tilted slightly, her body relaxing, but her gaze never wavered from the cub. She didn't approach, didn't bare her teeth, only watched, as if entrusting the cub's fate to Lena. The realization hit hard. This wasn't an attack, not a mistake. The she-wolf had brought her cub here to save it. An act so far beyond instinct it felt almost human. Lena's hands shook, the responsibility sinking in, heavy and undeniable. Lena stayed on her knees, her eyes blurring as the cub's frail form summoned memories of Ethan, his small hand in hers, his laughter fading in the hospital's sterile light. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her skin, refusing to let tears fall. Her heart felt squeezed, the old pain of loss mingling with a new, fierce compassion. She couldn't let this cub die, not like Ethan, not when she had a chance to act. She looked at the she-wolf, their eyes meeting across the meadow, a silent pact forming in that glance. The wolf's gaze was steady, trusting, as if she knew Lena was the one to carry her burden. "I'll take care of him," Lena whispered, her voice hoarse, not to the cub but to the mother, to Ethan, to herself. She stood, resolve hardening, and decided to bring the cub inside, though she had no knowledge of caring for a wild animal. Her soldier's courage and a mother's heart would have to be enough. Inside the cabin, Lena moved with care, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. She opened the bag fully, using an old towel to gently wrap the cub, avoiding direct touch to keep him calm. He was limp, his whimpers faint, his body cold. She placed him in a wooden crate from under the kitchen counter, lining it with another towel for warmth. Carrying the crate to the wood stove, she set it down and pulled out an old heating pad, plugging it into the generator and setting it to low. The faint hum filled the cabin as she hoped the warmth would revive him. She filled a small bowl with water, placing it near the crate, but the cub was too weak to drink, his eyes half closed, his breathing shallow. Lena knelt beside him, watching, willing him to hold on. She grabbed her phone from the military backpack, its screen cold and blank, no signal, not even a flicker of bars. The isolation of the bitter root, once a comfort, now felt like a cage. She stepped back onto the porch, the meadow still cloaked in fog, and scanned for the she-wolf. There was nothing. No tracks, no howl, no sign she'd ever been there. The tattered bag lay on the gravel, its rips and stains the only proof of the morning's strangeness. Lena's stomach twisted, a mix of loneliness and duty settling in. She was alone with the cub, the only one who could help him now. She returned inside, her eyes falling on the cub's frail form, and felt the weight of her choice. Lena sat by the crate, the cub's faint whimpers filling the silence. Her gaze drifted to Ethan's photo on the table, his smile a beacon in the dim light. The cub's struggle mirrored her own, her fight to save Ethan, her failure to keep him. She didn't know how to care for a wild animal, had no training, no guide. But the cub's existence, delivered by a mother's sacrifice, demanded she try. He left the cabin door unlatched, an irrational act for a soldier, as if inviting the she-wolf to return, to see her cub safe. "I won't let you die," Lena whispered, her voice rough not just to the cub but to Ethan, to the part of herself she'd buried. She stood, adding logs to the stove, her movements deliberate. The night loomed ahead and she would keep the cub alive, driven by instinct, by loss, by the unspoken promise she'd made in the meadow. The cabin glowed softly in the flickering light of the wood stove, its warmth pushing back the chill of the bitter-root night. Lena Harper knelt beside a wooden crate, her eyes fixed on the wolf cub nestled within. The cub's breathing had steadied, no longer the shallow, trembling gasps of the morning. His tiny body, wrapped in an old towel, was still, the shivers that had racked him now gone. The glow of the stove danced across his gray fur, revealing patches of white that gleamed like fresh snow. His eyes, golden and fragile, opened slowly, catching the light with a faint spark of life. He nudged his head toward the small bowl of water Lena had placed nearby, his tongue lapping weakly at the droplets, each movement a small victory. A soft whimper escaped him, not the desperate cry of before, but a quiet search for safety, as if he sensed he was no longer alone. Lena watched, her soldier's discipline keeping her hands steady, though her heart raced with cautious hope. She gently lifted the towel, checking his body for injuries. There were no deep wounds, only a few shallow scratches on his legs, likely from the brutal journey inside the tattered canvas bag. She wiped his fur with a warm, damp cloth, the mud flaking away to reveal the cub's delicate beauty, a creature too small to have survived such odds. Morning broke over the meadow, the fog lifting to reveal a world dusted with frost. Lena opened the cabin door, the cold air rushing in sharp against her skin. She stepped onto the porch, her boots crunching on the gravel, and froze. There, etched in the soft earth, were paw prints, large, deliberate, circling the porch in a perfect ring. They weren't aggressive, no claw marks or torn soil, just a quiet presence, as if the she-wolf had returned in the night to check on her cub. The prints trailed from the porch to the meadow, disappearing into the grass. Lena's breath caught, her mind flashing to the silver-furred wolf, her golden eyes, her desperate mission. She fetched an old ceramic bowl from the kitchen, filled it with clean water, and placed it a few steps into the meadow, a silent offering to the unseen mother. Back inside, she glanced at the cub, who stirred slightly, his ears twitching as if he felt his mother's nearness. The connection between them, invisible yet undeniable, settled over Lena like a mantle. She left the door unlatched, a habit now, as if the she-wolf might return, though she knew the chances were slim. The act was less about expectation and more about honoring the trust placed in her. Lena sat by the crate, the cub's faint whimpers filling the quiet. She reached for Ethan's photo, placing the silver frame on the table, his smile catching the firelight. The sight of him, forever 6, clawed at her heart, but tonight the pain was different. Not just loss, but a spark of something new. She felt trusted not only by the she-wolf, but by a force greater, as if Ethan himself had guided this cub to her, giving her a chance to save what she couldn't before. Her fingers tightened, nails digging into her palms, holding back the tears that hadn't fallen since his funeral. "You'll be okay," she whispered, her voice rough, speaking to the cub, to Ethan, to the broken pieces of herself. The words were a vow, born not of knowledge but of compassion, of a duty she hadn't sought but couldn't refuse. She stood, adding logs to the stove, the crackle of wood grounding her. Lena, the soldier, the mother, would keep this cub alive, driven by a resolve that felt both ancient and newborn, a fragile hope flickering in the darkness. Days passed, and the meadow outside the cabin grew familiar, its grasses bending under the weight of morning dew. Lena established a quiet ritual. Each night she placed the ceramic bowl in the meadow, filled with scraps of canned meat, crumbled bread, and sometimes a sliced apple, food she hoped the she-wolf could stomach. By dawn, the bowl was gone, only to be found later, a few dozen feet from the cabin, tucked among the grass, licked clean. No tooth marks marred its surface, no scratches scarred the earth. Lena traced the area, finding the she-wolf's paw prints, lighter now as if she moved with care to avoid detection. One morning she discovered the bowl beneath a cottonwood, its roots cradling a patch of flattened grass where the wolf might have rested. The prints led deeper into the meadow, fading into the wild. This silent exchange became a pact, a bond between two mothers, one human, one wolf, both scarred by loss, both fighting for something beyond themselves. Lena began to notice other signs of the she-wolf's presence. A tuft of silver fur clung to the rough bark of a cottonwood, glinting in the sunlight like a beacon. Another day, she found a shallow scratch on a tree trunk, not deep enough to wound but enough to mark, a subtle claim of territory or a message of vigilance. These traces, small and fleeting, wove a thread of connection through the meadow. Lena felt the she-wolf watching, waiting for news of her cub, her golden eyes hidden in the shadows. "He's okay," Lena murmured to the grass one morning, her voice soft, knowing only the wind would carry her words. The signs were a message. "I'm still here, watching." They eased the loneliness of her mission, reminding her she wasn't alone. The she-wolf's trust, unspoken but palpable, became a lifeline, tying Lena to the cub, to the meadow, to the life she was slowly rebuilding. Inside the cabin, the cub grew stronger, his movements less faltering. He crawled from the crate one evening, his legs wobbly but determined, his golden eyes bright with curiosity. He stumbled across the floor, chasing the flickering shadows cast by the stove, his ears drooping, his tail a tiny wisp. Lena watched, her breath catching as he explored, his playfulness a stark contrast to the fragility she'd first seen. One night, as she sat in the worn armchair, the cub clambered into her lap, his gray fur soft against her hands. He curled into a ball, his warmth seeping into her, a soft whimper escaping as he settled. Lena froze, her heart pounding, the sensation achingly familiar. Ethan's small body nestled against her, his breath steady in sleep. The memory flooded her, joy and pain entwined, threatening to break the dam she'd built around her grief. She clenched her fists, holding back tears, and gently stroked the cub's fur. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a promise to the cub, to Ethan, to the she-wolf. The cub's trust marked a turning point. Lena wasn't just his caretaker, but his protector, his mother in this moment. Each night as he slept in her lap, she felt the wound of Ethan's loss soften, not healed but bearable, the cub's life a fragile light in her darkness. The afternoon sky over the Bitterroot Mountains darkened, heavy with the threat of a coming storm. A biting wind swept across the meadow, bending the grass and rattling the cabin's loose shingles. Lena Harper stood on the porch, her breath clouding in the frigid air, her eyes scanning the horizon where black clouds churned like a brewing sea. The stillness of the past days was gone, replaced by a restless energy that set her soldiers' instincts on edge. She knew a blizzard was coming, one that could bury the cabin in snow and cut her off from the world. Inside, she moved with purpose, her movements precise despite the unease curling in her chest. She secured the single window, hammering nails into the frame to brace it against the wind, and stuffed old rags into the gaps around the door, sealing out the cold. The wood stove roared as she piled logs high, the crackle of burning pine filling the cabin with warmth. She checked the small generator, its hum a faint reassurance against the growing howl outside. The wolf cub, nestled in his wooden crate, whimpered softly, his gray fur catching the firelight. Lena dragged the crate closer to the stove, layering it with an extra blanket to shield him from the chill. She smoothed his fur, her touch gentle, ensuring he was safe. Outside, the first snowflakes fell, thick and relentless, swallowing the meadow in a white haze. The wind's shriek rose, a sound eerily like a wolf's howl, making Lena start, her hand pausing on the cub's crate. She glanced at Ethan's photo on the table, his smile steady in the flickering light. It felt as though he were here, watching over her through the storm, just as she watched over the cub, a fragile life entrusted to her care. As night deepened, the blizzard reached its peak, the cabin trembling under the onslaught of wind and snow. Lena sat by the stove, the cub curled in his crate, his breathing steady but faint. The world beyond the walls was a void, the meadow obliterated by swirling white. Then, through the storm's roar, a sound cut through, a distant howl, weak and fleeting, barely audible above the wind. It was the she-wolf, Lena was certain, calling from somewhere in the meadow, her voice a threat of defiance against the blizzard's fury. The howl faded, swallowed by the storm, but it left Lena's heart pounding, her senses sharpened. She rose, her boots heavy on the floor, drawn to the sound as if it were a summons. Before she could settle, another noise came, a heavy thump against the door, not a knock, but a solid, deliberate impact, as if something had pressed itself against the wood. Lena's pulse quickened, her hand reaching for the oil lamp on the table, its flame wavering as she moved. She approached the door, her fingers trembling not from fear but from a premonition that something momentous was unfolding. She cracked the door open, the wind howling through the gap, snow stinging her face. The porch was empty, the meadow a blank expanse of white, the howl silenced. She strained her eyes, searching for a glimpse of silver fur or golden eyes, but there was nothing, only the storm's relentless assault. Lena shut the door, the cold still clinging to her skin, but the sensation of being watched lingered, heavy and undeniable. It wasn't a threat, not the prickling dread of danger she'd known in combat, but the familiar presence of the she-wolf, as if her spirit hovered just beyond the walls. Lena returned to the cub, kneeling beside his crate, her fingers brushing his soft fur. His golden eyes flicked toward the door, alert, as if he too had heard his mother's call. Lena's chest tightened, the ache of Ethan's loss rising like a tide, but this time it carried a flicker of hope. She thought of the she-wolf, another mother fighting for her child, her howls a testament to a love that defied the storm. Lena's fists clenched, her nails biting into her palms, holding back the tears she hadn't shed since Ethan's funeral. Her heart felt lighter, as if she and the she-wolf shared a silent mission, bound by their losses, their resolve. She kept the lamp burning, its glow a beacon against the darkness, and sat by the window, staring into the snow-choked meadow. The she-wolf was out there, Lena knew, waiting, watching, just as Lena had waited for Ethan in those final, helpless hours. "She's still with you," Lena whispered to the cub, her voice low, steady, a promise to them both. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin a fragile bond held fast. A thread of trust woven through the night. The blizzard roared through the Bitterroot Mountains, its icy winds clawing at the cabin, snow piling high against the walls. Inside, the wood stove crackled, casting a warm glow over the wooden crate where the wolf cub slept, his tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Lena Harper sat by the window, the oil lamp's flame flickering in her hand, her eyes scanning the white void beyond. The storm's fury had intensified since the faint howl she'd heard earlier, a sound she was certain belonged to the she-wolf calling through the chaos. The memory of that howl, fragile yet piercing, lingered in her mind, as did the heavy thump against the door that had followed. Her soldier's instincts, honed by years of vigilance, urged her to act. She rose, her boots soft on the creaking floor, and approached the door, the lamp's light trembling in her grip. Her heart pounded not with fear but with a certainty that something profound was unfolding. She cracked the door open, the wind howling through the gap, snow stinging her face like needles. The porch was bathed in the lamp's glow, and there, standing resolute against the storm, was the she-wolf. Her silver fur was soaked, heavy with ice, her lean frame swaying slightly from exhaustion. Her muzzle brushed the wooden floor, leaving a trail of melted snow, her ears erect, her golden eyes gleaming with a quiet strength. She let out a soft howl, barely audible above the wind's scream, yet it cut through Lena's chest like a blade, a final farewell that carried the weight of a mother's love. The she-wolf's gaze shifted past Lena, locking onto the crate where her cub lay, his gray fur stirring as if he sensed her presence. Lena stood frozen, her hand tightening around the lamp, time itself seeming to halt. In that moment there was only her, the she-wolf, and the unspoken bond between two mothers, forged in loss and trust. The she-wolf made no move to enter the cabin, her body rooted to the porch, as if the threshold marked a line she couldn't cross. She touched her muzzle to the floor again, a deliberate act, as if marking the place where she had entrusted her cub to Lena's care. She stepped back, her frame low, her fur matted with snow, but her eyes never left the crate, drinking in the sight of her cub, alive and safe. Another howl came, shorter, almost a whisper, its notes fading into the storm's roar. It wasn't a call for her cub to follow, but a quiet expression of gratitude, a tremor that seemed to ripple through the meadow despite the blizzard's chaos. The she-wolf turned her head, her golden eyes meeting Lena's for a fleeting moment. There was no threat in her gaze, no fear, only recognition, a silent acknowledgement that Lena was the one chosen for this task. Her strength, though waning, held a fierce dignity, a mother's resolve unbroken by the storm or her own exhaustion. She took a final step into the snow, her silver form blurring in the white haze, then vanished entirely, swallowed by the blizzard's embrace. The porch stood empty, the wind's wail filling the void, leaving Lena alone with the weight of what had just passed. Lena closed the door, the cold still clinging to her skin, her chest tight with a familiar ache, the same raw grief that had gripped her since Ethan's death, but this time it was laced with something new, a profound respect for the she-wolf's sacrifice. She set the lamp down, her hands shaking, and clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms to keep the tears at bay. She hadn't cried since Ethan's funeral, and she wouldn't now. Not when the she-wolf's trust demanded her strength. She moved to the crate, her eyes falling on the cub, his tiny body curled in the blanket, unaware of the farewell that had just taken place. The responsibility settled over her like a mantle, heavy but sacred. She had been chosen, not just to save this cub, but to find a path through her own pain, to heal by carrying forward the she-wolf's love. Ethan's photo sat on the table, his smile vivid in the firelight, and for a moment, it seemed to merge with the she-wolf's piercing gaze, both urging her to keep going. Lena knelt beside the cub, her fingers brushing his soft fur, the warmth of his body grounding her. "I'll do it," she whispered, her voice hoarse, a vow to the she-wolf, to Ethan, to herself. The words were a lifeline, tethering her to the mission she hadn't sought but couldn't abandon. She sat there, the storm raging outside, the cub's steady breaths a quiet rhythm against the chaos, and felt a spark of purpose ignite within her, fragile but undeniable, guiding her through the long night. The blizzard had passed, leaving the Bitterroot Mountains cloaked in a blanket of fresh snow, the meadow outside the cabin shimmering under a weak morning sun. Lena Harper stood in the doorway, her breath clouding in the crisp air, her eyes tracing the path ahead. The storm's departure had brought clarity. The wolf cub, now strong enough to survive, needed help beyond what she could offer. The ranger station, 6 miles away, was her only option, a chance to ensure the cub's future, to honor the she-wolf's trust. Inside, the cub stumbled across the cabin floor, his golden eyes bright, his drooping ears twitching with curiosity. His gray fur, once matted, now gleamed, and his steps, though wobbly, carried a new confidence. Lena knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his soft coat, and felt a pang of resolve mixed with dread. She lined her old military backpack with a worn blanket, creating a nest for the cub, and gently placed him inside, his head poking out, his fur brushing her shoulder with a warmth that steadied her. She packed water, bread, a flashlight, and her combat knife, then paused at the table, her gaze lingering on Ethan's photo. His smile, forever 6, seemed to nod in approval. "You're coming with me, okay?" she whispered, her voice soft, as if speaking to her son. She shouldered the backpack, the cub's faint whimper like a reassurance, and stepped into the meadow. Snow crunched under her boots, the cold wind tugging at her jacket, but Lena moved with purpose, her soldier's training guiding her through the uneven terrain, the cub's warmth a quiet anchor against her back. Nearly 2 miles into the journey, the meadow narrowed, flanked by low pines and a fallen cottonwood. Lena's steps slowed as her eyes caught a shape in the snow, a still, curled form, dusted with frost, nestled beside the tree. Her breath caught, a chill deeper than the air settling in her bones. It was the she-wolf, her silver fur glinting in the sunlight, her body coiled in a peaceful arc, her head resting on her forepaws. Lena stopped, her heart heavy, recognizing the mother who had dragged her cub to safety. The she-wolf's flank bore an old scar jagged from a hunter's trap or bullet, and faint scratches marked her legs, testaments to a grueling journey through hunger and danger. There were no fresh wounds, no signs of violence, only the quiet exhaustion of a mission fulfilled. She had carried her cub as far as she could, then lain down, as if guarding herself in one final act of defiance. Lena knelt, her gloved hand hovering over the snow near the wolf, not daring to touch. Her chest tightened, a mix of sorrow and awe washing over her. The she-wolf's sacrifice, her unyielding love, was a mirror to Lena's own fight for Ethan, a fight she hadn't won. But this time, she could carry on. Lena's eyes blurred, the image of the she-wolf blending with memories of Ethan, his small hand slipping from hers, the hospital's cold light. She clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms, refusing to let tears fall as she had since his funeral. The cub stirred in the backpack, his head nudging her shoulder, his soft whimper a reminder of the life she was protecting. The she-wolf had trusted her, and that trust fueled a fierce determination, a promise she couldn't break. "She did everything for you," Lena murmured, her voice rough, speaking to the cub, to the she-wolf, to Ethan. The words were a vow, binding her to the journey ahead. She stood, her gaze lingering on the she-wolf's serene form, a silent tribute to a mother's strength. The ranger station was still miles away, but Lena's steps were steady, her soldier's resolve hardened by the weight of the cub against her back. She would get him there, not just for his survival, but for the she-wolf, for Ethan, for the part of herself she was fighting to reclaim. Lena unzipped the backpack, her hands trembling as she lifted the cub and set him gently on the snow beside his mother. His gray fur ruffled in the cold wind, his golden eyes wide, blinking against the light. He took a hesitant step, his muzzle brushing the she-wolf's silver coat, a soft whimper escaping as if calling to her. There was no response, only the stillness of the meadow, the snow's quiet embrace. The cub pressed closer, his small body curling against hers, his head resting on her forepaws, seeking the warmth that had once sheltered him. His fur blended with hers, gray against silver, a fleeting moment of reunion under the winter's sun. Lena knelt a few feet away, her breath shallow, watching the cub's gentle nudges, his whimpers fading into silence. After a time he lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers, steady and unafraid. He staggered toward her, his steps clumsy but deliberate, leaving his mother behind without a backward glance. The act was simple, yet profound, a recognition that Lena was now his guardian, the one the she-wolf had chosen. The pact between them, forged in the meadow days ago, was complete. Lena's knees sank into the snow, her eyes fixed on the she-wolf, and for the first time since Ethan's death, tears broke free, hot against her frozen cheeks. She wept silently, her shoulders shaking, not just for the she-wolf, but for Ethan. For the grief she'd locked away, now spilling over like a river undammed. The she-wolf's sacrifice mirrored her own desperate fight to save her son, the hospital nights, the prayers unanswered. But here, with the cub, she had succeeded, a small redemption that cracked the armor around her heart. She reached for the cub, her fingers sinking into his fur, and pulled him close. "She gave everything to keep you alive," she whispered, her voice choked, the words a bridge between her pain and the she-wolf's. Ethan's smile flashed in her mind, not accusing but gentle, as if he were there, approving. The tears slowed and Lena wiped her face, the cold stinging her skin. A part of her felt lighter, not whole, but mended, stitched together by the love of a wolf and the life of her cub. Lena understood now. The she-wolf hadn't just saved her cub, but had saved her too, giving her a purpose to pull her from the abyss of loss. The she-wolf's mission was complete. She had delivered her cub to safety, then curled into the snow, her rest earned. Lena cradled the cub, placing him back in the backpack, his warmth a steady pulse against her shoulder. She would take him to the ranger station not only for his survival, but to honor the she-wolf's trust, a vow that bound them across species. She rose, her eyes lingering on the she-wolf's form, serene in the meadow's embrace. "Thank you," she whispered, to the she-wolf, to Ethan, her voice steady despite the ache. A new strength stirred within her, born of grief but tempered by hope. Lena turned, snow crunching under her boots, the cub's soft whimpers guiding her forward. The meadow stretched ahead, vast and quiet, carrying the she-wolf's legacy in the small life nestled against her back. The snow-crusted meadow stretched endlessly before Lena Harper as she trudged through the Bitterroot Mountains, her boots sinking into the powdery drifts. The 6-mile trek to the ranger station had been grueling, the cold biting at her exposed skin, but the weight of the wolf cub in her military backpack kept her steady. His soft whimpers, muffled by the blanket lining the pack, were a constant reminder of the she-wolf's trust, a trust Lena carried like a sacred vow. The cub, now stronger, poked his gray-furred head out, his golden eyes bright, his drooping ears twitching at the wind's low moan. Lena's journey was nearly over, the station's faint outline emerging through the pines, a weathered wooden shack, its chimney trailing a thin wisp of smoke. Her heart pounded, not from exhaustion but from the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Would the rangers understand the she-wolf's sacrifice? Or would they take the cub away, reducing her story to... She adjusted the pack, feeling the cub's warmth against her shoulder, and pressed on, her soldier's resolve unyielding. The station's door creaked open as she approached, revealing Tom Grayson, an aging ranger with a silver beard and tired eyes. He squinted at Lena, then at the backpack, where the cub's fur peeked out, a soft whimper escaping. "You're a long way from anywhere," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, stepping aside to let her in. The warmth of the station's wood stove enveloped her, thawing her frozen fingers. Lena lowered the pack, revealing the cub, and began her story. The scraping sound in the dawn fog, the she-wolf dragging a tattered bag, the cub's frail body inside, the paw prints circling her porch, the blizzard's howl, and the she-wolf's body curled in the meadow, serene in death. Tom listened, his face impassive, stroking his beard, his eyes softening with a quiet respect for the tale of a mother's love. He poured tea from a dented kettle, offering her a seat by the fire, and asked about the cub's health. "He's stronger now," Lena said, her voice steady, noting his bright eyes and tentative steps. Tom nodded, his gaze lingering on the cub, who stirred in the pack as if sensing the weight of the moment. An hour later, the rumble of a truck broke the station's quiet. 2 wildlife control officers stepped in, their uniforms crisp, their faces set in bureaucratic detachment. They carried a metal cage and a clipboard, their eyes narrowing at the cub. One officer, a wiry man with a clipped voice, knelt to examine him, muttering terms like quarantine and rehabilitation. "This cub needs to be processed," he said, flipping through his forms. "State custody, standard procedure." The other officer readied the cage, its bars glinting coldly in the firelight. Lena's stomach twisted, her hands tightening on the backpack. The cub whimpered, his small body pressing against her as if sensing the threat. She stood, her voice trembling but firm, cutting through the officer's murmurs. "You don't understand," she said, her eyes blazing. "His mother chose me, not you. She dragged him through hell, died to keep him alive, and I'm the one she trusted to finish what she started." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding, the cub's soft whine echoing her defiance. She stepped closer, her fists clenched, her soldier's poise masking the storm within. "I won't let you take him without knowing what she gave up." The officers exchanged glances, their confidence faltering under her intensity. The wiry one shifted, his pen pausing over the clipboard, his eyes flickering with doubt. The room grew tense, the crackle of the fire the only sound, as Lena's resolve held like a wall, unmovable, forged by the she-wolf's sacrifice and her own buried grief. Tom Grayson cleared his throat, his voice low but commanding, slicing through the standoff. "She's telling the truth," he said, his eyes steady on the officers. "This cub isn't just another animal. It's got a story, one that deserves to be heard." He leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped, and proposed a compromise. Treat the cub as a special case, allow Lena to keep him temporarily while further assessments were made. Give her a chance to prove she can handle it, he added, his tone leaving little room for argument. The officers hesitated, their authority challenged by the ranger's quiet authority and Lena's fierce conviction. After a murmured conference, the wiry officer scribbled a note, his jaw tight. "Fine," he said, his voice clipped. "Temporary custody, pending review. You'll report his condition weekly or we'll be back." He snapped the clipboard shut, the cage left untouched. A silent concession to Lena's stand. Lena exhaled, her shoulders easing, the cub's warmth against her a lifeline. She had won a small victory, not just for the cub but for the she-wolf, whose trust she'd upheld. She turned to Tom, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady, a soldier's acknowledgement of an ally. He nodded, a faint smile creasing his face, and waved her off as she shouldered the backpack. The cub nuzzled her shoulder, his fur brushing her neck, a quiet affirmation of their bond. Lena stepped back into the snow, the station fading behind her, the meadow opening wide. She felt lighter, as if she'd carried Ethan's memory through this fight, protecting the cub as she couldn't protect her son. The path home stretched ahead, and with each step the cub's soft whimpers echoed the she-wolf's legacy, a promise kept in the heart of the Bitterroot. The cabin in the Bitterroot Mountains stood quiet under a pale winter sun, its weathered logs a haven against the snow-dusted meadow outside. Lena Harper returned from the ranger station with a weight lifted, the wolf cub still hers, at least for now. She set her military backpack down, the cub scrambling out, his gray fur catching the light as he tottered across the floor. His golden eyes gleamed with a spark of life, a far cry from the frail creature she'd found in the tattered bag. Lena watched him, a faint smile tugging at her lips, the first in months. She named him Ember, not for fire but for the small, steady light he'd brought into her life, a flicker of hope rising from the ashes of her grief over Ethan. Their days settled into a simple rhythm, as natural as the wind through the meadow. Lena cooked on the wood stove, the scent of simmering stew mingling with the piney warmth of the fire. She tore off bits of bread for Ember, who nibbled eagerly, his tiny teeth grazing her fingers. She never caged him, never tied him, letting him roam the cabin's cramped space, his paws pattering on the worn boards. It was her promise to the she-wolf. Ember would grow as a wild creature, not a pet, loved and protected but free to be what he was meant to be. Each morning, Lena opened the door and Ember bounded into the meadow, his gray fur shimmering under the sun, chasing shadows in the snow. Yet he always returned, his eyes seeking hers as if recognizing her as family, a bond forged in the she-wolf's trust. Lena took to repairing the cabin, her soldier's skills at work, hammering loose boards on the porch, sealing cracks in the walls, ensuring a safe haven for Ember, much as she'd once dreamed of doing for Ethan, her son lost to a cruel accident. Ember grew quickly, his frame filling out, his movements gaining strength. His eyes, once clouded with exhaustion, now shone like polished gold, and his ears, once drooping, stood half erect, twitching at every sound. He was a whirlwind of mischief, pouncing on the flickering shadows cast by the stove, batting at Lena's scarf with playful nips, his soft whines bubbling with joy. He took to curling up beside the table where Ethan's photo rested in its silver frame, his gray fur brushing the wooden legs as if drawn to the boy's presence, in Lena's gaze. One evening, as Lena sat in the creaking armchair, Ember leapt into her lap, his small body a warm weight against her chest. He curled into a ball, his breath steady, his fur soft under her fingers. The sensation was achingly familiar. Ethan's small form nestled against her, his sleepy sighs filling the quiet nights before the accident stole him away. Lena's heart thudded, but the pain was different now, softer, laced with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. She stroked Ember's fur, her voice low and gentle, telling him stories of Ethan, of the meadows they'd explored, the laughter that had once filled her world. "He'd have loved you," she murmured, her tone no longer rough, as if speaking to both her son and the cub, two children bound by her love. Ember's presence was a balm, healing wounds she'd thought permanent. She began to smile, small at first, then more freely, her heart lighter, as if Ember had carried a piece of Ethan back to her, not to replace him, but to remind her she could still love. Lena's gaze often drifted to the meadow where the she-wolf's spirits seemed to linger, woven into the rustle of grass and the distant howls that pierced the night. She felt her presence not as a ghost, but as a quiet satisfaction, a mother content that her cub was safe. Lena continued the ritual of placing a ceramic bowl on the porch, filled with water, a gesture that had begun as an offering to the she-wolf. She knew the she-wolf would never return, her body resting in the meadow where Lena had found her, but the act was a way to honor the promise. "I'm taking care of your son," she'd whispered to the wind, her voice steady, a vow unbroken. Lena understood that Ember wasn't hers to keep forever. He was a child of the wild, destined for the forests and meadows of the Bitterroot. When the time came, she would release him, just as the she-wolf had trusted her to do. Each night she sat by the table, Ethan's photo glowing in the lamplight, and spoke to him softly. "I'm doing the right thing, aren't I?" she asked, her words a plea for approval from her son, from the she-wolf, for the strength to carry on. The question wasn't born of doubt, but of a need to affirm the path she'd chosen, a path that had reshaped her. This commitment to the she-wolf's legacy made Lena stronger, not just as a soldier who had faced war and loss, but as a mother who had lost her child yet found the courage to love again. Ember's playful leaps, his warm weight in her lap, his trusting eyes, they were gifts not only from the she-wolf, but from a universe that had seemed cruel, until now. Lena's grief for Ethan remained, a quiet ache that would never fully fade, but it no longer consumed her. She had learned to hold it alongside hope, to let love coexist with loss. The cabin, once a refuge from pain, had become a home, its walls echoing with the soft patter of Ember's paws and the crackle of the fire. Lena stood on the porch one evening, watching the meadow glow under a rising moon, the distant howl of a wolf carrying through the air. She felt the she-wolf's approval, a silent nod from the wild that she was fulfilling her role. Ember nudged her leg, his fur brushing her hand, and she smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. "We're okay," she whispered to Ember, to Ethan, to the she-wolf, her voice carrying the strength of a woman remade by love, ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing she could love fiercely and, when the time came, let go. Spring arrived in the Bitterroot Mountains, transforming the meadow outside Lena Harper's cabin into a vibrant tapestry of green. The snow had melted, giving way to lush grass speckled with wild flowers that swayed under a warm morning sun. Lena stepped out, her boots soft on the earth, the air alive with the hum of insects and the sweet scent of blooming clover. Ember, the wolf cub, now grown larger, bounded ahead, his sleek gray fur glinting in the light. His tail wagged, his ears stood half erect, and he leapt through the grass, chasing invisible quarry, his playful energy a stark contrast to the frail creature Lena had found months ago. Yet he never strayed far, always glancing back to ensure Lena was near, his golden eyes meeting hers with a trust that warmed her heart. She carried her old military backpack, its weight familiar, holding water, a knife, and tucked carefully inside Ethan's silver-framed photo, a quiet companion on their walk. Lena moved with ease, her steps lighter than they'd been in winter, the meadow's vitality mirroring a shift within her. She paused, watching Ember dart after a butterfly, his paws kicking up tufts of grass. A rare smile curved her lips, the kind she hadn't known since Ethan ran through Missoula's fields, his laughter echoing in her memory. The moment was fleeting, yet it anchored her, a reminder of joy amidst loss. A gentle breeze stirred the meadow, carrying a distant howl, low and resonant, that made Lena's breath catch. It was a sound she knew well, echoing the she-wolf's calls from those early nights, stirring a familiar sense of connection to the wild. As they ventured deeper into the meadow, Lena's eyes caught movement among the grasses. A small wolf cub, its pale gray fur almost white, stumbled from behind a clump of clover. Smaller than Ember, its golden eyes wide with curiosity. It tilted its head, watching them, its steps unsteady but fearless. Lena froze, her hand tightening on the backpack's strap, her gaze sweeping the landscape. Farther off, on a low rise, stood a larger wolf, its silver fur gleaming, its posture tall and alert. Its ears were erect, its eyes sharp, fixed on Lena and Ember with a quiet intensity. Unlike the she-wolf who had brought Ember to her, this wolf radiated strength, its coat unmarred by scars, its presence suggesting a pack intact, a family thriving in the Bitterroot's embrace. It didn't approach, didn't howl, only watched, a guardian observing from a distance. Ember paused, his ears pricking, his body tensing as he noticed the smaller cub. He let out a soft whine, his eyes flickering between the cub and Lena, but he didn't move toward it. Instead, he stepped closer to her, his fur brushing her leg, a deliberate choice to stay by her side. Lena stood still, her heart pounding, feeling the weight of the larger wolf's gaze. It wasn't threatening, not like a predator sizing up prey, but familiar, echoing the she-wolf's look of recognition months ago, as if acknowledging the bond Lena had forged with Ember. Lena's eyes lingered on Ember, his gray fur catching the sunlight, his trust in her unwavering. She saw the opportunity before him, a chance to join his kind, to run with the pack, to live as the she-wolf had intended. Yet his choice to stay, to press against her, stirred a bittersweet ache in her chest, mirroring the way she'd held Ethan's memory close, unwilling to let go. She knelt, her fingers sinking into Ember's fur, her touch gentle but firm. "And there you'll go," she whispered, her voice soft, steady, accepting that the forest, not the cabin, was his true home. The words weren't born of sorrow, but of clarity, a recognition that her role was temporary, a bridge between the she-wolf's sacrifice and Ember's future. The larger wolf let out a faint howl, a single note that hung in the air, then turned, its silver form leading the smaller cub away. They melted into the meadow, their shapes fading among the grasses, leaving Lena and Ember in a profound silence. Lena's heart felt light, not pained, as if a weight had lifted. She understood now, releasing Ember would be the final act of her promise to the she-wolf, a way to honor the love that had brought him to her. She stood, brushing the grass from her knees, and resumed their walk, Ember trotting beside her, his fur aglow in the sunlight. The meadow stretched wide, vibrant with life, and in that moment Lena felt a quiet hope, not just for Ember but for herself, a woman learning to carry love and loss in equal measure. The encounter lingered in Lena's mind as they wandered, the meadow's beauty a backdrop to her thoughts. She had seen the wild calling Ember, yet he had chosen her for now. It was a gift, but also a reminder of the she-wolf's trust, a trust that demanded she prepare him for the day he'd leave. Lena's fingers grazed the backpack where Ethan's photo rested, and she felt his presence, not as a wound but as a guide, urging her to do right by Ember. The larger wolf's gaze, so like the she-wolf's, had carried no judgment, only an understanding that Lena was part of this story, a temporary guardian in the cub's journey. She looked at Ember, his playful bounds a stark contrast to the solemnity of the moment, and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You'll be ready," she murmured, her voice carrying a promise, not to keep him but to let him go when the time came. The meadow seemed to hum with approval, its grasses swaying, its wildflowers nodding under the spring sun. Lena and Ember walked on, side by side, their bond a fragile, beautiful thing, carrying the she-wolf's legacy and Ethan's memory into the future, a future where love meant both holding tight and setting free. The cabin glowed under the soft flicker of an oil lamp, its warm light casting shadows across the worn wooden table where Lena Harper sat. It was a quiet spring evening in the Bitterroot Mountains, the meadow outside alive with the hum of new life. Lena's fingers, calloused from her soldier's past, held a pencil, its tip trembling slightly as she wrote in a tattered notebook. Beside her, Ethan's silver-framed photo caught the lamplight, his 6-year-old smile a steady presence, as if he were watching her work. Her handwriting, though shaky, was clear, each word a testament to the journey that had reshaped her. "The she-wolf brought her cub to me because she couldn't save him alone," she wrote, her voice silent but her heart loud. "I've kept him, but I'll let him go because the forest doesn't hold forever what it gives." She chronicled the story, the scraping sound in the dawn fog, the tattered bag dragged by a silver-furred mother, the frail cub inside, the paw prints circling her porch, the blizzard's roar, and the she-wolf's body curled in the meadow, serene in her final rest. Ember, the cub, was her light, a spark of hope after the darkness of Ethan's death. Lena paused, her eyes tracing Ethan's face in the photo, and wrote of him too, of how she felt his spirit had guided the she-wolf to her, teaching her to love again, to hold tightly and release gently, just as he had left her but lingered in her heart. She ended with a truth that felt like a revelation. The silver-emmed she-wolf didn't just save her cub, she saved me, showing me that sacrifice is giving everything for a chance. The words anchored her, a map of her transformation etched in ink and memory. Lena closed the notebook, her fingers lingering on its worn cover, and turned her gaze to the meadow beyond the window. The grass swayed under a rising moon, its silver light a mirror to the she-wolf's fur. She imagined the story of the silver-eyed she-wolf, spreading, carried like a howl on the wind, touching hearts far beyond the bitter root. She wanted others to know of a mother who, through pain and exhaustion, dragged a bag across the wild to save her cub, entrusting him to a stranger and finding peace when he was safe. Lena's voice, though silent, burned with a quiet urgency. Let this story remind people that love, whether human or animal, is the courage to give all for hope. A lesson the wilderness taught with every rustling leaf and distant call. She thought of others like her, those who had lost someone dear, their hearts shadowed by grief. Perhaps this tale would be a beacon, as Ember had been for her, a reminder that light could pierce even the deepest darkness. She set the pencil down, a sense of completion settling over her, as if she had written not just for herself, but for Ethan, for the she-wolf, for the world that needed to hear. "It's enough," she whispered, her voice soft, a final note to the story she'd lived. Lena had learned a truth that transcended species. The love of a mother, whether wolf or woman, was a force that defied boundaries. The she-wolf with her desperate journey and Lena with her unyielding grief had both fought for their children, their hearts bound by a shared devotion. She understood now that letting go wasn't loss but respect, a reverence for the natural order, for the lives meant to run free. The she-wolf had released Ember to her care, trusting her to nurture him until he could return to the wild. Lena, too, would release him when the time came, just as she carried Ethan's memory, not as a chain but as a light within her. The she-wolf's legacy was vast. It was Ember, growing strong in the cabin. It was Lena, remade by love. It was the story of wild love, a love untamed, unconditional, stronger than death itself. Lena looked at Ember, asleep beside the table, his gray fur aglow in the lamplight, his breathing a soft rhythm in the quiet. She felt a peace she hadn't known since Ethan's death. Not an end to pain, but a balance, a way to live with it. The grief was still there, a quiet ache, but it no longer defined her. She had healed, not completely, but enough to face the days ahead with courage. Lena rose, her movements slow, and opened the cabin door. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of grass and pine, and a distant howl echoed through the meadow, a reminder that the forest was alive, its pulse unbroken. She stepped onto the porch, Ember stirring to follow, his fur brushing her leg. The stars above were bright, a canopy of light that seemed to hold the she-wolf's spirit, Ethan's smile, and the promise of Ember's future. Lena stood there, the meadow stretching before her, and felt the story of their journey settle into the earth, a tale that would echo long after she and Ember parted ways. "We did it," she murmured to the she-wolf, to Ethan, to the cub at her side, her voice steady, carrying the weight of love and the strength to let it go. The howl sounded again, farther now, a song of the wild that would carry their story forever, through the forests, across the mountains, into the hearts of those who listened.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.